Good afternoon, guys. How are you all doing? All right. My name is Sri Ilaprolu. I am part of the AWS Public Sector team. I head up our IoT activities around the globe. Today, the topic of the session is we're trying to explore how voice capabilities from AWS and Amazon in general have the potential to positively impact in a number of ways. I mean, all of us are probably by now familiar with Alexa and some of the interesting things you can do with it. But in this session, rather than just doing funny things, we're actually going to take a little bit of a deviation on how this technology has the potential to be applied in situations where accessibility needs can be met. Rather than just me talking about it, what I thought I would do is introduce a little bit about the 3 voice-enabled or voice-based services that Amazon has in its offering, but then let our customer, Nikhil from state of Georgia, head of a director for digital services within state of Georgia, go through a practical example of what they are facing in terms of a challenge, what they have done with voice enablement services, and what the early results are. So this is not a hypothetical situation anymore. This is an actual use case in production, and so you'll start seeing some real implications as to where and how it can be leveraged. So with that, this, as you can see on the slide here, this is becoming real. Not too long ago, when you talked to someone and said, "Can voice be my primary mode of interaction with an IT system?" Most likely the answer was, probably not. But now it's no longer at that stage. And we'll go into some of the reasons as to why we're seeing that transformation happening. I mentioned there are 3 services in total at Amazon that are voice related. 2 in particular are based as AWS services. So the distinction being Alexa is an Amazon service. Alexa service runs in the cloud on AWS. However, there are a couple of services that are purpose-designed and built as AWS services that customers can launch and initiate in their own account and manage and control in a much precise way. So those 2 services are Amazon Polly and Amazon Lex. So what is Polly? Polly, simply put, is a text-to-speech service. So feed it a piece of text, it will give you an audio stream or an audio output. There are a variety of use cases where this type of, even though on the surface it may seem very simple, there are huge implications as to where it can be applied, and we'll go through some examples. Some of the other features that Polly has, multiple languages, multiple voices that come with it, so you're not just doing in a single language or a single voice. It's also very low latency, so give it a piece of text, you get the audio input or audio output pretty much instantaneously. And this is built where you can incorporate this service into your own application. So we'll go through some examples as to where that's being done. Oops, let me back up.
Alice was beginning to get very tired of sitting by her sister on the bank and of having nothing to do. Once or twice she had peeped into the book her sister was reading, but it had no...
All right, enough. The idea there is previous voice assistants sounded like they were computers speaking. The idea behind Polly and Lex and Alexa is we want to create a voice service that is human-like, because that's really only when you'll start getting that interaction, the conversation, that's the natural language-based processing happening. Other examples, this one,
Today
for
in
example,
Las Vegas, Nevada, it's 54 degrees Fahrenheit.
Previous versions of, once again, voice-enabled services would have read this as, or text-to-speech services would typically read this as today in Las Vegas, and it's 54 degrees or 54 F. They wouldn't do that automatic translation inline, so you get that natural processing happening as well.
We live for the music, live from the Madison Square Garden.
It's, once again, the whole point being it's human-like, it's as natural as we possibly can get. And the other interesting thing here is it's only going to get better over time because there's artificial intelligence built into the service. Both Lex, Polly, Alexa, all of those are getting better over time.
Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers.
It's just random samples, so just let it go. I mentioned multiple languages, 24 different languages to start out, actually 27 different languages to start out, and this list is going to keep growing. And as you can imagine, there are some languages that are not on the list here, so don't pay too much attention to the list that's here. Expect that this list will keep growing over time, and we have obviously some customer input and feedback as to which languages should be high up on the priority. The other interesting thing here is there is no fixed cost. You pay as you go. Literally, when you use a service, you pay for it. When you don't, you don't. And the cost itself is fairly inexpensive. Let's look at some examples. Duolingo is a company that makes language learning software and allows individuals and people to learn interesting other languages. And if you're interested in one mechanism that Duolingo is using it is if I type something in, let's say, English, and I want it in some other language, in voice, so I want to actually see how that's pronounced or how it's actually said. Duolingo is using that for doing all of that inline processing for all of their users to do that audio translation or audio transmission. GoAnimate is another company that's doing this where, in their case, if I'm producing a video and I want to add voiceover on top of it, rather than going after and getting professional speech, I don't even know what they're called, but I guess playback, voiceover, yeah, there you go. Voiceover artists using Polly to do all of that inline, so that I just feed it the text, I get the audio output, I merge the video and audio, I have a high quality product going out, and doing that in a cost-effective way. This one is interesting. This is out of UK. This is Royal National Institute for Blind. What they're doing here is taking content that they already have, using Polly to convert it into audio so that it's much more accessible to individuals with visual disabilities. And this is an area where we expect and we're seeing quite a bit of interest from customers here in the US as well as other geographies, where being able to take content that exists somewhere, creating an audio output for a variety of reasons. In this case, to help with disabled individuals. In other cases, just getting over the accessibility needs. And by the way, I missed going into this early on, which is when we refer to accessibility, it's not only limited to disabled individuals. Clearly is one of the areas, but think about situations where you may not have the IT skills to operate the modern IT systems. So older generation individuals that may or may not be able to operate modern IT systems. Instead, if they can use voice, it's a much better communication model or a communication mechanism with an IT system. Or if you have situations where you're dealing with individuals in a socioeconomic situation. Once again, being able to use voice, and I'll get into some examples as to where voice can be pretty much incorporated everywhere, into every device that you can think of. And that's another area where we see accessibility of information and IT resources being made available through voice at a very inexpensive way so that anyone that has a need can interact using natural language. Let's take a look at Lex. If you're familiar with Alexa, Lex is actually the brains in Alexa. Lex is the core engine on which Alexa is built. Or I should say it's the reverse. Alexa has been built. Lex is the engine or the brain that's inside of it. Based on customer input and feedback, Lex has been extracted out as its own offering so that customers can incorporate that into their own solutions, as opposed to having to go through, hey, Alexa, do this. High-level features, it can do text as well as speech recognition. So Polly, you're feeding it text, it gives you audio. In case of Lex, you can voice and send a command or ask Lex. It can understand it, because remember, it's based on Alexa logic. It's doing the natural language processing and understanding and automatic speech recognition. It is then able to execute things on your behalf and then come back using Poly, come back with audio, right? So it gives you the voice interaction in and out. Where are typical use cases for this? And this is just the initial set that we're thinking and we're seeing customers use it in. This is an area where there is immense interest. For those of you that were here early on for the keynote, you heard the CIO of CIA talking on stage about how they're looking at Lex and Poly and Alexa in general of potentially using these to meet needs of accessibility challenges that the agencies are dealing with. So that's an area that is absolute interest for us as well as customers. But quickly summarizing the use cases: informational bots, text-based bots, productivity bots. So if let's say you're operating an IT help desk for your own internal operational needs. Rather than me picking up a phone and talking to somebody, I can literally chat, either using voice or text, and have that information automatically processed using AI, and then if necessary, escalate to a human. So it's trying to reduce the load on human interaction as much as possible and offload some of the more mundane things that a machine can do using AI, offload that from humans. And then there is an interesting angle when it comes to IoT, and I'll go into that in just a second. Some of the benefits: extremely easy to use, similar processing logic behind the scenes as Alexa, and it's mainly you can incorporate this into your own applications, mobile, web. So this actually extends the Alexa benefits that you're used to, but now you can get that in your own applications. How does it work? There are 4 main areas. I won't go into too much details here, but the idea is at a very high level, you're defining an intent. This is what you want to do with that particular bot. In this example, I'm trying to book a hotel, right? Utterances these are the types of commands or the way I would say to book a hotel, right? I can say, book me a hotel, or book a room. There are different variations that a human would interact and voice to express their intent. So those are utterances. Third is slots. This is where we're collecting information. In case if I book a hotel, probably I need where am I starting from or where am I going to, so I know where to book a hotel, when do I need to do it, and any other conditions or data points that I need. So those would be considered slots. And then the last thing is once I complete all of that transaction, Lex has to do something to actually make the booking happen, right? So that's the fulfillment aspect of it. I mentioned in this case example, if I say book a hotel, and let's say I even gave it NYC, it recognizes that I'm invoking a book a hotel intent, and I'm using the utterance, so it recognizes it, parses that utterance out, and it starts parsing bits and pieces. It picks up NYC, that's the location. It knows I'm trying to book a hotel, so it starts parsing that out and start filling some of these slots. And then if I haven't provided the start date or the check-in date or the checkout date, it's going to ask me, prompt me, because when I defined the bot, I said I need 3 intents in order to fulfill this whole, or I need 3 slots in order to fulfill this intent. So it knows I got the destination, but I don't have a check-in date or a checkout date. So it's going to prompt me, when do you want to check in, when do you want to check out, right? So the whole idea being it needs to be conversational. And then once that information is provided, it goes ahead and it can execute a Lambda function. This is where things get really interesting. It's no longer a closed box system. Lambda allows you to extend the functionality that's natively built into Lex or Alexa and let you do many, many more custom additional processing and logic that's outside of the scope of what the service can do on its own. And then once Lambda gets executed, a function, that's the actual booking operation. It gives you back the confirmation, and that's when Poly is used to voice over and relay that back in a voice mode. Some interesting examples here, probably won't go into a lot of details, but some of you that may have been here yesterday, there was a session that American Heart Association has done where they went into how they're using Alexa and Poly and Lex in order to embed voice capability into their web applications. Similarly, Ohio Health has built they have a mobile app that their patients and members use they're now embedding voice. They have embedded Lex into that mobile application. So rather than me picking up the phone and trying to navigate using a touch interface, I can just simply touch and start speaking. So now you get the whole, do you need, for example, I need to make an appointment with my doctor. All I have to do is press, tell what I want, and the bot executes on your behalf, starts making that appointment. Finally, before I hand it to Nikhil, Alexa. This is where the whole thing started. About 2 years ago, most of you probably have seen some variation of the device. There are just some basic backgrounds. Alexa, let me build this out. Alexa, I mentioned, is the service in the cloud in AWS. Echo is that cylinder, right? There are two distinct things. Echo is the box. Alexa is the actual brains in the cloud running in AWS. There are two ways in which you can use or trigger Alexa. On the left-hand side is what's called Alexa Skills. This is where you write, so there you go. This is where you can actually write, similar to what you did with Lex, you express the way you expect your users to interact, and you create a skill out of that. And that skill can be published, and you can make it openly available so that anyone that has an Amazon account and has an Echo unit or any other device that's voice-enabled with Alexa can start using that skill. When we started, there were literally a handful of skills, now over 10,000 skills. Some that are extremely interesting skills. For example, Capital One has an entire mobile banking that you can do entirely on Alexa using an Echo unit, including transactions that you can conduct from your bank accounts. The other way Alexa gets used is what's called AVS. This is where, rather than you having to use an Echo unit, what if we were to take that same capability and allow you to embed in any of your own devices? That's what AVS does. It's the voice service that you can embed into your own devices, and that, in turn, calls Alexa service in the cloud. And that's really where we are seeing that the longer-term vision, and this is starting to happen more and more every single day. You're seeing probably in the press that more and more companies are starting to embed Alexa into their own products and services. And this is where we expect voice to go, where in the not-so-distant future, touch and type is going to be more or less optional. It's going to be natural speaking in voice is where things are going to go. But with that, I'm going to actually ask Nikhil to come up and talk about some real-world example of what they're doing at State of Georgia.
All right, good afternoon. How's everyone doing? All right, great. Now, I'm so honored to be here and be standing here sharing our story. Wanted to just kind of quickly get a glance and see how many of you are actually involved in a project that does something similar to what we are doing. Something to do with Alexa, something to do, okay, good, I see a few hands. And how many of you are planning on doing it in the near future? Awesome. Do connect with me. I would love to know what you all are planning on, because when we are going through this and learning more and more as we go through our new challenges. So I'm Nikhil Deshpande. I'm the Director for Digital Services within the state of Georgia. And I'm not from a technology background per se, but I'm a big user advocate. And I understand technology just enough where we can pick and choose what makes sense for us, for our users. And that's really what led to this Alexa project that we are working on right now. And I'll be happy to talk about that. For the next few minutes, and I don't have a lot, but I'm going to try and cover these, but I'm going to try and find some time towards the end for some Q&A. I want to talk about, in general, why universal access matters, how conversation user interface really extend to accessibility. So those two acronyms, I come from a government space, so I'm sorry I had to kind of put those in there, and I forgot to make sure I wrote accessibility, but the LI stands for accessibility, for those who probably not aware of that. And lastly, I want to conclude by talking about what we are doing with the Ask Georgia Gov skill. So let's just jump into it, right? So when we talk about accessibility, when we talk about disabilities, like the first thing a lot of the people think about is maybe blindness, any sort of limitation. But actually, if you look at the spectrum of disabilities, we see there's visual, there is auditory, there's motor skills, cognitive. A lot of times just by our choices of a screen changes, it could bring seizures to some users. So clearly, one of the things that we focused on for our web platform was to make sure our web was accessible enough to the point that we could start extending to other channels. The reason why we did that, and the reason anyone should be doing it, why we should be making our products accessible, is just because it makes a good user sense, makes a good business sense. Regardless of you being in the public sector or private sector, if you're serving all of your users, there's no reason why, right? You should not be doing everything you can to make your products accessible. It just really makes your site user-friendly. Anyone can use it. Anyone can, regardless of their limitations, regardless of the devices that they're using, they can easily understand things and go about doing whatever they are seeking to do. And as you probably saw in Sri's slide deck, like technology is only getting smarter. It's only going to be enabling everything that the users are aspiring to, and why not? So user-friendly sites. And again, like disability is a huge prevalent thing around, and we have to make sure that we first understand that there are disabled users. And they don't show on your analytics, right? As per the ADA Act, like we're really not, allowed to go seek, hey, who has a disability? And also, disability is not something that comes with a flag. There are so many subtle disabilities around that we have to think about, we have to cater for, that they don't show up on our analytics, and that's where we have to really think about how we are serving our content. We also have this issue of there are some, temporary disabilities. We are all going to be there at some point because, honestly, we all are aging. And as we age, we can kind of see there are certain things, maybe through vision, maybe through motor skills, we're going to be there. So we may as well have a world that already is aware of catering to the disabilities and make sure that all of our content, our web properties are really accommodating that. Lastly, but not the least, whenever I talk about disability within the organization, this gets the point through. It's the law, right? At least at the federal level, everyone's required to be accessible. And at the state level, if you're using federal funds, your web properties or any digital properties need to have that accessibility aspect taken care of. So basically, if you're not thinking about accessibility before getting into any additional channels beyond your web or digital channels, like truly think about why we need to have the accessibility aspect taken care of, because it's not just about, it's mainly about the users, but also as we do it, we just make our digital property a lot smarter, because search engines, right? I mean, this is Public Sector Summit, but still, we care about where we show up in our searches. And search engines really can't see images or they can't hear audio. So if you truly take time and make sure your content is accessible, you just end up making yourself search-friendly. And the fact that you are already doing that, you don't really have to make extra efforts to make sure that you are search engine friendly. So regardless if a user is looking at your digital properties or a script is looking at your digital properties, having accessible digital property makes a lot of sense. So how do you extend, right? How do you extend accessibility across channels? One of the big thing from a digital services perspective within the state of Georgia, we are really trying to cater everything from a web perspective. We are working with agencies wherever they are seeking to do native mobile apps to kind of first see if it makes sense to have a web app. And if it does, just make it responsive, make it accessible. It really, there's no reason to have something as a separate entity by itself. But conversational interfaces is something we are really excited about is because it is not just an extra channel that we're looking at. It is not just a technology that is exciting us. It's a great medium, right? It's a great medium for natural interaction. And all of us can really agree that we were brought up using a keyboard and a mouse to put in our inputs, right? The moment we started using touchscreen devices, like as a designer, like we can agree that, I don't need those buttons, right? Because those buttons were meant for like an in-between of the user and a content. But the interaction, the way we just go pick up an object, the way if we can just touch the content itself, that's such an easy transition to an interaction. And that's exactly what a conversational interface does in our day-to-day interactions. It takes away that load of us understanding how a website might be structured or what are the keywords I should be putting in, search and then clicking around. It's just a conversation. The way you would ask a friend, that is really where we want it to go. So, really, each person, each of us, unknowingly, we use systems in a certain way. And the way we start using it creates a pattern, and it's different from every other person that we are doing. So while we have these conversations, it's really becoming apparent like our intents, right, to this action are no different anymore. Our intent is the action. So the key here for what we wanted to do is we have a web platform that extends out to state agencies and elected officials. And all the content sits on this web platform. One of the key things we wanted to do was not duplicate any of this content when we extend that content to a conversational device. So when we were building that skill, we wanted to make sure that we tap into the existing content and make it work for a web page and also make it work for a conversational device. Also, the beauty of this is it all sits on one platform. Before we can discuss conversational interfaces, right, we're looking at a comparison between a graphical interface and a conversational interface. And it's not so much of a replacement. We all can agree that a conversational interface is a complementary addition to a graphical interface. If you were to really research something, it would take you a long time to sit with Alexa and try to understand the entire subject domain of a certain topic. It's a lot easier to browse and go through screens. But if you know exactly what you're looking for, if you have that one transaction in mind, you can have that pointed interaction a lot easier rather than just opening your computer, going to the site, trying to click on things, going through the process, just the way Sri was saying, Capital One, like, hey, I just want to transfer $15 from this account to the other. Boom, done, right? So conversational interface really kind of helps you with that very pointed singular interaction as opposed to a graphical interface where you could actually be doing 2 or 3 things at the same time. But for that, the true ingredient that we need to take care of once we have all the technology in place is content. Our content that sits on our websites need to be structured, right? So structured content or structured information really means that a big chunk of content is separated into different parts, and each of those parts have some sort of a context around it. And content management systems really help you do that, and that's what really we rely on. We use Drupal, and Drupal helps us create structured content. And because we have structured content, it makes it a lot easier to then connect to the skills of a conversational interface. If you all are not really acquainted with the idea of structured content, it's really easy. I'm not saying it's easy to create structured content. It's really easy to understand what structured content is because we have been seeing this all our life, right? So we've been filling out forms. And really what a form asks you to do is put in that needed piece of information in its place. The reason we do that is because then it makes sense to someone what they can do with it going forward. The idea is not new, and there are some other companies that have already taken structured content to the next level. So if we look at this, for example,
This year, make your taxes a snap with the SnapTax app from TurboTax. Just snap a photo of your W-2 and it automatically imports all your info and fills in all the right places. Just answer some easy questions and SnapTax guides you to your maximum refund so you can be confident your taxes are done right.
All right, so not an endorsement for TurboTax. Anyone can do this now. The wow factor is gone because we know technology can easily do this, right? But the reason technology can do this now is because the content is structured. There are platforms put in place where now content makes sense for like a basic picture. But back then, for 2011, right, I mean, this was like, wow, this was a great idea. So structured content is key, but it doesn't only flow from outside to in. It can also, if you have a platform, if your digital properties really have structured content around it, it can flow out to multiple channels as well. So this is where you kind of have that single source of truth mindset for your content. Because then suddenly what happens is your content is not just restricted to your web pages or your applications. Your content starts breathing through different APIs and getting syndicated across multiple channels. So let's unleash the content and start reaching out to different channels and different devices, and that's really kind of like where we get to these new devices that are in the future, right? They're already there. Conversational interfaces, Alexas, and especially these dots, right? I mean, they're just like everywhere. Like we have 2 in our house. Like my kids, honestly, keep themselves busy, and that's like the best, cheapest babysitter I've got. The key is, though, when I just observe them interacting, it's really interesting because they would ask something very pointed, and Alexa would go like, I don't know. And that was like a trigger where like, obviously the skill is getting better by the day. But if we are offering state information through that particular skill, we cannot really just depend on the user to know just the exact words, right, to ask, just the way search engines work. So we have to build around that. We have to look into the user vocabulary of what is it that they should be asking or they could be asking, and then accordingly map content to that. And this is really new ground, especially for government. And the interface, the conversational interface is pretty much called as the interface of the future. But it's really intelligent aspect because it's the voice technology so much is not just a voice recognition, it's natural language. The key here is to have a conversation, not just to answer a pointed question. So that really kind of brought us to the idea of creating a skill for Georgia.gov. One of my jobs within the team is to make sure the Georgia.gov website is updated with the most recent content, any changes that happen around legislature. So we wanted that to be extended to an Alexa skill. So we launched the Ask Georgia.gov Alexa skill, and we enabled, obviously, a lot of the content where we could be using that. And the moment we saw how we could be using content, it gave us like 2 kind of, when we looked at like how people could be interacting with it, it almost confirmed that the way we had structured the website, thankfully, was very conversational. And if we are looking to do something similar where a website content can be extended to a conversational device, I think that is key. Because unlike traditional websites or like the 311 services, Georgia.gov skill really enables the user to have a rich conversation, but it has to be some sort of a conversation that has content created as a conversation. And what we have on Georgia.gov is a list of top popular topics, which we intended to be more conversational just from a web perspective. So it was a lot easier for us to tap into those and just say, okay, if 70 or 80% of the people coming to Georgia.gov are asking these questions, let's just make these conversational to begin with. And that's what we did. But before I get into like the actual making of like what we did, I just want to kind of touch upon like why we chose Alexa for this project. Like the first thing we did was obviously worked with a development vendor who had a lot of experience in creating conversational interface skills. But we still wanted to keep it pretty open. We wanted to be pretty agnostic for like what can we do and what makes sense. Obviously, the market share was tremendous, so that really kind of gave us like a good reason to choose Alexa. But at the same time, the developer experience part of it and the ecosystem was truly key for the selection of Alexa as the conversational device that we wanted to pilot this out with. It really allows us to have access to a very wide user pool through this skill, and it makes it a lot conversational, which makes the entire interaction really easy. So the three things that we truly kind of stumbled upon that were key with any interaction were CUI usability, again, conversational user interface, usability aspect, the information architecture aspect, and the biggest one was content strategy. Conversational interfaces, as challenging as they are, they still challenge the existing methodology of information architecture, right? The way content is structured on the website. The usability aspect of it, like how easily a user interacts with an interface, it's purely which is voice-driven. It can have the user intentively learn the interface without having to understand the structure behind it. So we're not like focusing anything on them to learn like, oh, wait a minute, how did you not know that? You should click here. No, it should be intuitive. The architecture, right? I mean, it's really like access information through the decision flow of what's the next intuitive thing they could be asking. And content strategy is such a key aspect in here because the technology takes care of the interaction, but the interaction will not succeed if the content is not structured in a certain way. And that's really kind of how the content strategy piece of that came in. So as I said, Georgia.gov website is largely driven by topic-based FAQs, which was convenient for conversation, but this is usually not the case in many websites, right? I mean, FAQs are definitely hidden down somewhere. So we made an early decision to kind of keep the content editor responsibility to the lowest or to the minimum as possible. And we wanted to also make sure that we prevent like conversationalization of the experience. Like we don't want it to kind of keep going back and forth. Like between 2 and 3 questions and answers, they should be able to reach their destination. So, we wanted to prevent that bifurcated collection of content. So we wanted to really, if someone is supposed to click twice or thrice to get to the right place, they should be really asking just 1 or 2 questions to get the right answer. That was our mindset. So really what Alexa right now replies as an answer comes from the pages, right? Because the skill integrates a built-in search that we had to implement on Drupal that conducts queries and fetch the results and essentially presents those results as questions. And based on the user input, you can then go to a certain page and the relevant portion of the page where it, again, gives you that answer. The biggest thing we had to do to make sure that this was successful was create a conversational content audit. And that was interesting because that's like, honestly, this is the first time we are doing something like this. We have done content audits before, but now looking at it from a conversational lens was really interesting to kind of see how that actually delivers, right? Because, for example, something like this, how do I file a complaint against a business? If this was a page that we're looking at, like immediately, visually, we can glance through these list links and say, oh yeah, this is where, I want to have a complaint against like charities. I don't trust this one, to be honest. Well, go to the Secretary of State, right? But if it's a conversational experience, you would have to go through link after link after link to just read this page out. Then what do you do, right? So this is where it was key for us to get all the assistive technology to benefit from the skill set, because the content needs to be really focused, and content needs to be delivered just to that right question. In addition, Alexa also sidesteps some of the issues from like browsing websites, which we wanted to kind of make sure that the screen reader experience, what Sri was showing, was not repeated, right? Because that defeats the purpose of my conversational piece is pretty much mimicking a screen reader. So we wanted to kind of then break this page and have each link wrapped with certain context. And then as the skill asked questions and as the user answered those questions, it would be pointed to that particular answer and be read as a paragraph. Links in particular can be super distracting and really unattractive in a conversational context, right? Because regardless what it is, you want the answer. And then when you choose that is the right answer, then you can select the next step if you wanted to go to the next piece. So with that, I would love to show you guys what we have been working on from this skill perspective. It's still in production. We're still working on it. We are pretty close to releasing it, but it has been an interesting educational experience going back and forth on how the interaction happens. And for this to even get to this phase, we had to do a lot of usability testing. So it wasn't just something we built and we are looking to launch. Like, we constantly saw how people were using it, what they were asking, and what the responses they were getting. So let me get into that. Is there something I need to play? Okay.
Alexa, ask Georgia Gov.
Welcome to Georgia Gov. Feel free to ask a question.
How do I get my driver's license?
Does this sound helpful? Getting and renewing a driver's license.
Sure.
The Department of Driver Services helps you earn, renew, or replace learner's permits and licenses. To carry a full license for everyday, non-commercial vehicles, you must be at least 16 years old. You'll pay $32 to renew your license for 8 years. You can save $5, however, if you renew your license online.
I just moved. How do I transfer my out-of-state license?
Does this sound useful? I'm a new state resident. How do I transfer my license?
Yes.
To apply for a license, you should schedule an appointment and gather your current out-of-state license, social security number, proof of Georgia residency, bank statements, utility bills, and rental contracts all work, and proof of identity, birth certificates, passports, or immigration ID cards. At the appointment, you'll surrender your former license, pay the license fee, and receive a temporary license. Your permanent license will arrive by mail just a few weeks later.
Give me that phone number.
The number for the Georgia Department of Driver Services is 404-657-9300. If you need that number again, say repeat.
Repeat.
That number again is 404-657-9300. If you have another question, feel free to ask it. Otherwise, you can say exit.
Exit.
I do want to give a shout out to our development partners who have been working so hard on this with us, Acquia Labs. It's really coming along well, and both of us are learning, and it's the way we see interactions happening, it is very promising. So some of the takeaways I would really kind of just focus on is accessibility is equally about content as is it about technology, because technology really enables it. But if your content is not accessible, it really a big hurdle in making your web property accessible. Creating structured content is key, because like crafting content strategy is really, equal parts conversational and web optimized is to kind of really like run that tightrope. But it's very important. And once you have that balance struck, then you don't need to duplicate it. You don't need to have like two different versions of your content. Just the way, at one point we had like the M.dot mobile sites that cater to devices, and then we had responsive. Then boom, just one site responds to your devices. Kind of like the same thing, right? You don't need to have like a separate version of content for your skills. It could just kind of read off your existing site. Conversational audit. Like really key here, like as your skill developers, just make sure your content is constantly scrubbed and make sure it is conversational. Like again, going back to kind of Sri's example of some of these, abbreviations or some of these like GA. Like every time we had like a GA, Alexa used to read GA, and like oh no, go back and change it to Georgia. So that is really really important. And when we performed a conversational content audit to ensure that all these pages really are accessible and conversationally easily usable, it really gave us like the idea of the scope of what we need to do. Last but not the least, as a user advocate, I would say, this is really like the residents of Georgia. This project really upends the prevailing modes of access to government, right? Because this just opens up so many options for them. And I use this particular picture is because this is John Rempel. He helped us get our platform accessible to a certain level, adhered to Section 508 and WCAG 2.0 AA standards, but he is partially blind. He cannot see beyond 6 inches. And when he heard that this was going to be offered through an Alexa skill, he was just ecstatic because he uses Alexa. And then as we started having more conversations around that, I also kind of introduced him to if this, then that. And I'm like, hey, you know what, John? You can actually find your phone anywhere in your home if you just ask Alexa to find your phone through if. And he was like, what? Really? You have no idea. You just saved me at least 10 minutes every day. And, for me, it was like, hey, I do that all the time. But for him, I could tell, like, what a big deal it was. Like, I leave my phone all the time, but I can see it, and I can go find it. But for someone to not be able to see 6 inches away from you, having that technology just to help him save 10 minutes a day, it just made him super happy. And then, the way we see this as there are so many Johns right around us, and then if this skill just let someone have that easy interaction and get at least like that first tier of information as we advance the skill, I think this is worth it. So again, really happy to be here sharing this story. We are learning as well, so if you have anything to share, more than happy to answer any questions. Look me up, connect with me, and we can have more conversations. I already see one question coming up. Do we have time for questions?
Yeah, we'll take a couple of questions, and then we'll stand out there if you guys have any additional questions.
Hi, have you all considered an interactive style? So I think the big takeaway here is you've been really clever about your Drupal implementation, so it can be crawled and somebody can engage with it conversationally. But have you thought about the scenario where actually I actually have like an online form, so I can actually start like talking to that online form to say, hey, it's Bob. Here's my date of birth. Have you guys considered that within your strategy? Where does it lie, and what are your concerns around it?
It is on the roadmap. Just to quickly reveal what we are planning on doing is once we have this skill going, we want to extend the information to chatbots as well, see how that interaction goes around, and then we're going to tackle around the specific application-based systems.
So do you have Lex wired to understand what fixin' means in Georgia?
I gotta tell you though, like a few years ago, we rolled out a telephony service, and this was, I want to say a few years ago, this was in 2003 or 2004. And one of the reasons why it was way ahead of its time and did not really kind of work that well because it just could not understand Georgian accents. So they had to roll it back. One last one. Okay.
So my question's for Sri. So I've used screen reader technology like JAWS, and if you're talking about non-human-like text, it's terrible. So is there any sort of plan or desire from Amazon to use Poly to create a sort of screen reader type platform?
So the short answer is yes. I think it's actually, if I remember correctly, last week there was an announcement in the press. Washington Post is enabling all of the content using Poly to be accessible so that you don't have to sit and wait for screen readers in the traditional JAWS type of a sense.
Yeah.
You can ask Poly and initiate the conversation, or I have Poly go to a website or go to a digital property of any kind, press a button, and it'll start reading in a natural human-like language. It is completely web-based. So obviously you have to have a microphone of some kind where you're invoking it, and you have to have a speaker of some sort in order to get the audio back. But the idea is all of that should be done elsewhere in the cloud, and then you have to have devices to be receiving and transmitting information. So, yeah. All right, thank you guys. One round of applause.